Antarctica is a wild and extreme climate of sub-zero temperatures and drifting icebergs. In this remote and hostile land lies the unclimbed peak of Mount Foster, destination for the Northanger and her crew. But first, they must cross the rough seas of the Roaring Forties and drop anchor in Patagonia. Here, Mount Sarmiento will put their climbing skills to the test as they prepare for their ultimate challenge in Antarctica. Hello everybody, I'm Andy Mill. Antarctica is a vast and remote continent. Its brittle and windswept climate is haunted by the echoes of past expeditions and unrealized quests. The Northanger expedition is retracing the sea-to-summit dream of legendary explorer H.W. Tillman, who vanished at sea on his way to climb Mount Foster on Smith Island. But first, the Northanger must navigate through some of the most dangerous seas in the world. A continent hidden by ice, a land buried beneath water. Antarctica is striking in its beauty and cruel in its unforgiving climate. This is a place where only the hardiest of wildlife can survive. But for the Northanger, an ice-strengthened sailboat and her crew, the world's coldest and windiest climate will be destination and home. The Northanger expedition will retrace the voyage made by the legendary British explorer H.W. Tillman. His dream to scale Mount Foster on Smith Island will be carried out by this team. En route to Antarctica, they must first navigate through some of the world's roughest seas. They will then spend several weeks in Patagonia, training and preparing for the climb on Smith Island, the unrealized goal of Tillman's expedition. H.W. Tillman is a legend in the climbing and sailing circles of the world. Tillman took to the sea late in life. In his mid-50s, he sailed his first cutter, Mischief, to Patagonia, and for the rest of his life, sailed in the remote and desolate places of the world. The team is well suited to the challenge. Greg Landreth is the skipper of the boat. He has been sailing the Northanger for the past 8 years. Carrie Pashik, Greg's wife, will act as skipper once the men leave the boat on their attempt to climb Mount Foster. Anna Kemp will provide logistical support for the climbing team. Roger Thompson is a skilled technical climber, but he has never sailed a boat before. This will be his first major sea crossing. Bruce Dowrick has sailed and climbed extensively throughout the world, making him an ideal expedition member. Joanne Stratford, Bruce's companion, will act as support for the crew.
I think that what really makes this trip unique is essentially involved with the history of it, the history of Northanger. It's an ordinary man's trip, if you like, an attempt by essentially ordinary people to try and do something that's completely extraordinary and somewhat outlandish. We're not an inaccessible bunch of Big Bang climbers or world-famous sailors or anything like that. In fact, I don't think, had we selected people like that to come along, I don't think the trip would be successful.
With this specially designed boat, this team of explorers hope to realize Tillman's dream of stepping onto the base of a giant glacier to summit Mount Foster. The journey began 4 months ago in Vancouver, British Columbia. From there, they had to navigate through the treacherous seas between latitudes 40 and 50 degrees. This area, known as the Roaring Forties and Furious 50s, has strong gale-forced winds often reaching 100 knots. As the conditions become more severe, so too will the tests of human will. This is a journey from which many ships have never returned. Harold William Tillman was born in 1898 in Wales. He survived 2 world wars and was a man of disciplined character that thrived on extremes, finding the supreme test of human will amidst ice, desolation, mountains, and seas. It was destined that he fall in love with Antarctica. After a failed attempt at Smith Island, Tillman set off again, close to his 80th birthday. On November 1st, 1977, on board the ship En Avant, Tillman left Rio de Janeiro bound for the Falklands. The crew was never heard from again. Guided by the pioneering spirit of Tillman, the Northanger crew has come to fulfill his dream. Punta Arenas in Chile is the southernmost city in the world. Located on the Strait of Magellan between the Pacific and Atlantic Oceans, it has logically been a point of departure for Antarctic expeditions. The final preparations for the expedition are being made. This is the last major resupply and fix-it stop for the journey. Veronica and Dan Mannix joined the crew to document the Sea to Summit challenge.
My bookshelf.
Yeah, that's a good thing we kept
You're
it.
cutting up my bookshelf.
It should be back as far as possible, I suppose.
Installing the new radar that just arrived from Vancouver is critical. Throughout the journey, it will help them navigate through the narrow Patagonia channels and dangerous ice flows in Antarctica. They must find room for supplies that must last them 4 months in a ship 46 feet long, crammed with sails, climbing, and camera equipment, and foul weather gear for the 8 crew members.
Unfortunately.
The most obvious characteristic of the boat really is the lifting keel arrangement. Basically, the idea is that by being able to lift the keel sort of virtually flush up into the centre of the hull, you can get into 3 feet of water and set the boat on the beach if you need to be able to. Being designed for sailing around in ice-laden water such as Antarctica, if you're sailing in pack ice, the hull is also designed to be able to lift up. As a trade-off for the advantage of having the lifting keel, it's a huge compromise on the amount of space you have inside as regards sort of basically living space. Essentially what it does is take up the entire centre portion of the hull, which is generally in a normal boat, usually your largest sort of saloon type living area, but here, I mean, that's essentially split in half. I mean, that takes up an enormous area right in the centre of the boat.
We could probably utilise some space more, but we're learning as we go along. Like, we've cut extra holes and cupboards underneath the steps that we never had before, and there's a bit of our cold cupboards and our beer cupboard, and we could probably eventually start cutting a few more and digging around here and there. But it's tight. It's really tight, like you're almost sleeping with apples and stuff.
Superimpose a major climbing expedition on top of a fairly major sailing expedition or trip, if you like. So you've got gear which would normally take up an entire boat. You've got at least twice or nearly 3 times as much of that gear that you've got to squeeze in somewhere, and also be able to operate, in a reasonably efficient manner.
For years, Greg and Bruce sailed aboard the Northanger under the command of former owner Rick Thomas, a well-known skipper and renowned climber. After Rick's untimely death in a climbing accident, Greg and Bruce purchased the boat and have since committed themselves to following Rick's philosophy of simply equipped expeditions.
H.W. Tillman, I think, like any of the people that were first in his field, acted as a sort of catalyst for a whole slew of similar adventurers, people who sailed and climbed in various capacities. And we're essentially among them. We've read his books, and we admire or we're inspired by what he did. We'd like to count ourselves as being among those perhaps privileged people who'll be allowed to follow in his footsteps. 2 days out from Punta Arenas, we arrived in this Caleta Bow Basin. It's an absolute gem of an anchorage and one of the many hidden marvels we'll find in the winding inlets and channels of Patagonia. Bill Tillman was really the grandfather of these sea-to-summit expeditions, I suppose. He didn't bring anything with him he didn't need, and he relied for his security instead on knowledge and his wits. We're trying to keep to the same idea. If you're continually fixing things, there isn't any time left for climbing. Simplicity is the key here, and simplicity demands knowledge, not gadgets.
Of course, a sailboat is definitely not needed for an attempt on Smith Island. I mean, you could go there with a huge ship and a helicopter or something like that and essentially accomplish the same thing. But if I'm sort of in control of the entire operation of getting a climbing team from Canada to Smith Island, getting to the top and coming back again to somewhere that sort of approximates home, then viewed in that context, then a sailboat is really, well, it's not the only option, but it's really the only one that makes sense. I mean, you've got to cross an entire ocean, and all in the sort of context of being able to pay for it yourself or by the members of the expedition, and be in control of the whole sort of effort to get to the top. As far as here and now, from the point of our leaving to the point of our coming back, this is all we have. It's essentially a sailboat full of people, and that's our total resource.
The thing that to me is most attractive about Patagonia is essentially the fact that the only real access to the place is by sailboat, and that means that it's a chance to go somewhere where other people don't go. I mean, there's a lot of people in this world who'll sort of say, you know, the problem is that the world's got so small that there's nowhere left now that you can go and have a real adventure, there's no places left where you can sort of truly explore in the old sort of sense of the world. And yet I'm sure those people don't realise that there are whole islands that no one's explored. There's lots of things to find, and it's quite exciting, you know, when you go somewhere and you don't know what's around the next corner. Not too many people have seen too many photos or have too much idea of what, you know, the various inlets off the Straits of Magellan look like, for instance. And to my mind, they're equally spectacular.
Life on a boat is a test. Sometimes it's a severe test of patience and routine, the close confines and the Spartan conditions. The daily maintenance of the boat doesn't leave a lot of room for escape, but as Tillman said, comfort cannot be expected by folks who go a-pleasuring, and that's true. I don't know whether it was us that chose the sea as a route to the mountains, or maybe it chose us. But whichever is the case, we've all got to rise to the challenge, I suppose. Each crew member has a crucial role to play, but these roles seem to change on a daily basis. We've all got to know what to do in a tight situation. Some of the areas we're going to enter here are uncharted. The Northanger is not only our transport into them, but it's also our home and our lifeline. The safety of the boat is the most important thing here, And if that gets in the way of us climbing mountains, then I guess so be it.
As they approach Bahia Queda in the Magellan Strait, they get their first glimpse of Mount Sarmiento. Climbing this peak will be the test to see if they are ready for the unforgiving Mount Foster.
Yeah, God, you come here for one mountain and more keep appearing.
That's a nice peak over there, God.
God, it's just beautiful, isn't it? The Coletta Motor's sort of right round on the west side there. But I think if we went in there, we'd have probably too much of a Zodiac ride to get anywhere near a good landing spot to get onto the bottom of the peak. It seems like we'll be able to get up to the snow line up there pretty easily without having to bash through any too much bush. Well, I think this Mount Sarmiento is going to be as big a project as Smith Island by the looks of it.
When the time comes for the men to climb Mount Foster, the 4 female crew members will be in charge of the boat. They must be extremely well trained and competent to sail in the Antarctic waters.
Oh, look at the peak in the background now. Wow.
The fate of the men will be dependent on the return of the boat.
Okay.
Carrie will act as skipper.
Oh, we'll dump this thing in and then we'll have a smooth out. The process of Kerry taking over the skippering of the boat here is what we've been aiming for in Patagonia in the last 4 weeks.
Okay. So to lower it, you just go like this. Okay. Like that? Okay.
Me and the rest of the crew need to step back now
Keep going.
and allow her to assume full responsibility for the boat's safety.
Yeah, that's it for now.
It's easy for us to interfere, but at Smith Island, she'll be taking charge of the boat all on her own.
Yeah. So where's this elusive kelp patch? Where's the climbing harness? We can't go in until I get somebody up the spreaders. There's kelp everywhere. Inside? He's got his new boots on.
You climb, I'll pick up the slack. Come on, you climber.
It's so difficult sometimes to find places where we can leave the boat unattended or with hardly any crew on board. When we find an anchorage like that, though, the boat really explodes with activity. Seeing Mount Sarmiento, we realise it's going to be a really stiff challenge, but to have success here will be a real unexpected bonus, and it'll augur well for Smith Island.
After finding a safe anchorage for the boat, the entire crew decides to go ashore and climb the adjacent peak to get a better view of Mount Sarmiento. In a time when ambitious climbers were heading for the Himalayas, Tillman chose the peaks of South America. In 1955, he and the crew of Mischief arrived in Patagonia to cross the ice cap. Tillman earned the reputation for being Spartan and stood by the motto that said, "If you can't organize an expedition on the back of an envelope, then it's over-organized."
The basis behind the sailing to climb idea is that it allows us to access very remote areas of the world, which would be totally impossible to access any other way. And these areas of the world are very often where the ocean meets large mountains. Two huge forces of nature meet here. Some of the most fascinating areas of the world, and the clash of the natural forces is often extremely dramatic. And those are the places I like to be.
My first week of
Right.
Patagonia.
Right. Where else but Patagonia? Hey, there's the...
God, Greg, look at our boat. It's
Still
tiny.
there? Is it still there? That's what I like to see.
Yeah, it's still there.
Yeah. There's the other anchorage that we tried out.
I don't know, it's sort of the finish of all the work in a way, but it's just the beginning too at the same time. It's just bloody incredible. It's wonderful, isn't it? You know, just to be out here and to be doing this and finally be in Patagonia that, you know, we've dreamed of for years and years.
I mean, before Sarmiento has just basically been a name on the map and a number next to it, 7,000 feet. Sounds good. Let's go up there and make it as a sort of a trial run for Smith Island, but when you actually come up here and look at the reality, it makes you a bit weak at the knees. It's kind of, it looks pretty desperate, but I guess unless you actually go up there and have a shot at it, I mean, you know, you can't tell. So I guess that's what we'll do.
Back on the Northanger, they prepare for the climb on Mount Sarmiento.
So you just need a bivy bag for the outside and your fleece sort of...
They will split into two parties. Anna will stay on board to take care of the boat. Up until this point, there has been tension among the crew members. The cramped quarters and frequent bouts of seasickness magnified the tedium of their daily routine. Not only do they need a successful climb to erase the doubts and worries concerning Antarctica, they need a shared victory.
We might go across to the beach and light a fire.
And then I can bring dinner over there?
Bring it across and we'll keep it by the fire. Pizza. Yeah. We could take the radio and we can ring up for pizza.
Okay.
That's
a great idea.
And a style of pizza.
Leaving their problems back on board, they decide to enjoy one last meal together before the first team heads off.
It's great to be finally doing what we came to Patagonia for. The spirits are up and we got nothing to lose. This ought to be just pure fun. Bruce, Joe and Roger are going to head up the ridge in front of us. I think we'll follow later on once we've got the boat snugged down. At last, boat routine takes a back seat for a while.
The next day, team number 2 sets out for the climb of Mount Sarmiento.
Tillman's books gave us a clue to what we'd see up here. The landscape was sort of rough and scrubby and covered in deep moss, stunted trees and rotting branches. Up amid the higher peaks and snowfields, a heavy mist started to roll in, and the wind, which is the defining feature of Patagonia, started in earnest. We'd heard about the incredible violence of the wind here, but to be here and to see it and feel it was an amazing experience. High up on the ridge, even to try and stand up was an act of folly, risking being blown away. So we thought we'd better find a place to make camp. Way up there ahead of us, we didn't have any idea what was happening to the other team.
Packs are blown away. Are you sure this is a wind foil? Holy moly, what a force. Gonna be over soon? No, I just picked some blow
No way. It's not even blowing.
We heard this thing coming.
I saw it coming.
I know. I told
Oh,
you.
we
We heard it coming before we saw it.
What's that noise? What's that noise?
The weather here is really unpredictable and wild. We have these violent squalls known as willy wars that sometimes reach hurricane force.
Northanger. This is the others.
Being bashed around in a tent like this in this sort of weather is not our only worry, really. We're always worrying about the boat when we're away from it. We've been in the tent now for a couple of days, and it's raining as hard inside as it is outside, and we're soaked. We only go out there to secure the tent and packs. 3 days out, we think that this storm might easily last for a couple of weeks, and by that time I don't think we'd be in any shape to climb Mount Sarmiento. We're wet through and food's running out, so seems like it's even a good idea to be back on the boat again.
After 4 days, there was still no change in the weather. They decided to abandon the attempt on Mount Sarmiento. Miles ahead, the other team was stuck in a snow cave. They were also forced to turn back. Mount Sarmiento would remain an unclimbed peak. The team's expectations were dashed, and a newfound anxiety clouded their hopes. Had they come all this way, only to be defeated like Tillman?
Essentially, you've got to start off here with a grand dream. Set yourself a task that appears almost marvelously impossible or something like that. If you knew about the logistics or about the problems, about the troubles you're going to encounter on the way, you'd never probably attempt it. You're in big trouble if you try to organize something like this and stick too rigidly to what the dream requires of you. You have to deal with the real world, and in all these things, I guess compromise becomes self-evident. But somehow you've got to stick to the essential elements of the original dream that you had. Do whatever it takes to get there and do it.
Flour on deck. In the rain.
Wow, that smells really good. Did you make that? That dip?
Yeah.
Really? What's it made out of?
Tuna fish.
Good.
Really?
Yeah, it's excellent.
I didn't think you'd eat it. You did. I didn't want to put it in the pasta because I know you didn't like tuna fish.
Looks like I won't have to cook any dinner either. Oh, thanks for doing that, Ronnie. That's great.
So how long do you think it's going to take to get around that bend there?
I don't know. Could be tomorrow, could be a week.
Really?
Fly's blowing pretty strong out there, for sure. It's just that to get around the corner there, you have to be beating into a whole lot of Pacific swells. Yeah, which is being driven by, at the moment by a 30 knot to a 35 knot wind. So,
Ronnie?
and
yes, please.
when you come around the corner, you're going to be sort of on another lee shore there, so you have to make your way into the canal downwind, and if you miss it, you could be in big trouble at the moment.
Bartering in South America is a way of life. In Puerto Sofia, they came across a fishing boat that needed a part. In exchange for a repair kit, they received a bucket of sea urchins and some crabs for a gourmet meal. As the Northanger approaches Breakneck Peninsula, an area exposed to the full force of the Pacific Ocean, they must wait for the right moment to navigate around the point.
90% of the time you've got strong wind blowing from the west or the southwest that basically is funneled straight up Canal Coburn But as soon as we started to come out of the lee of the islands and we're sort of pretty much fully exposed to the winds coming in from the Southern Ocean, so we just have to wait until we can pick sort of a gap in the weather and we can duck around the corner. And once we're behind the island again, we can get secure anchorage once again. I mean, it's impossible to predict what we'll be doing going around there. We may get perfect conditions, but it's just as likely that we'll just have to sort of beat our way as best we can around the corner. It's just the way it is around here. The weather decides.
It was a lucky break. The seas were uncharacteristically calm. All they experienced was a big swell.
Beautiful up here.
Navigating in this part of the world means that you're in a place where you can't go for a long period of time. You've really got to know where you are pretty much all the time. So the way in which you navigate at sea and the way in which you navigate here tends to be quite different. When you're in the middle of, say, the Pacific Ocean, we pretty much just use celestial navigation, just navigate off the stars or the sun. And you can go for a couple of days if you don't see the sun or the stars, if it's cloudy, and pretty much you know where you are well enough to know that you're not going to hit anything. But here, obviously, these channels are typically less than 5 miles wide. So you're keeping a pretty good track all the time, working out what islands are what, and keeping sort of a distance off them. You work your way up the middle.
God, it was a beautiful day when we arrived in Oya. A great opportunity to explore the spectacular surroundings here. It was a real relief to get off the boat and stretch our legs. It was really the only time we're going to have to do a few practice climbs, I guess. We hiked through the beech forests and saw beaver dams and swamps and these weird fungi growing on the trees. And amazing glaciers coming down, dumping their contents into lakes close to the sea, wind roaring down them and throwing up these huge dust clouds. It seemed like we were in another world. The few rock climbs we'd managed to get in back at Brecknock had not really done a lot for our fitness. After a while, I think your climbing skills, like all those ice axes down on the bilge, start to rust, and it's a constant battle to retain your fitness when you're really going to need it. The rigours of sailing seem to be more mental than physical, and hoisting sails all day long doesn't really prepare us for a major climb like we're going to find on Smith Island. Ahead of us is the Drake Passage, which can be a really nasty stretch of water indeed. We all need a good burnout before we commit ourselves to it.
Nearly midsummer. It's nearly Christmas.
It's easy to forget the rhythm of the rest of the world when you've been gone from it for so long.
Sorry, Stephen. Where's Dan stalking?
Christmas is the one time that we could feel that we were still part of it. These long-cherished gifts from friends and family came out from their hiding places. And for once, all is still.
Yeah, it is a Christmas tape.
Please go right to the bottom. You're gonna get all your goodies mixed up. They'd have all these samples lying around. Scoop them. I scooped some, yeah. Some of the lighter bits that I could carry out. Wow, nice.
Thanks, Carrie. That's so nice.
Thank you.
That's so nice.
Yeah, good luck. Let's see.
I thought it was a ribbon. On
Christmas cake. Pause the hawk. Just goes with this, right?
Pulling into Port Williams, the southernmost port in the world, could not have come at a better time. They were ready to get off the boat, have a beer, and make friends again. Living together in such cramped quarters had worn them out. They needed to recharge before embarking on the next phase of the expedition.
Coming into Port Williams here, this is about the turning point of the trip really. We can stop heading west and start heading south again, down to Antarctica. Last resupply for another 3-4 months, and hopefully to the top of Smith Island. We're just pretty glad to have done these 10,000 miles without breaking anything too much or sinking. But here we are, southern Chile, and we're looking pretty good. We've broken a few things and stuff's just generally needed to be maintained all the way, but no, we're looking in good shape to be heading out across the passage and spend the next 3 months in Antarctica. I can see I'm not going to have any hair left. A little bit off the other side.
In Port Williams, one of the things we're doing is basically quitting one phase of the trip and beginning another by leaving behind the climbing and the hiking and the sailing through Patagonian channels, and we're going to be getting into a whole new world, and we're heading towards a new horizon, towards Antarctica.
About the cable being able to put it back in there.
There were lists and diagrams to be drawn up for things to do before the crossing of the Drake Passage.
So everything, like all the cans, all the supplies.
The boat had to be completely stripped down, overhauled and restocked. Repairs had to be made, and spares had to be bought. There would be no help of any kind once they arrived in Antarctica.
So the cooling water from the sea.
Over the course of the journey, Carrie has become proficient in running the boat. Now, with the onset of the Drake Passage, she must tackle the mechanics. Carrie has 1 week to learn everything about the running of the ship's engine.
So this is a manifold right here then?
Yep.
Right there.
This is pretty much where you leave landscapes that are kind of familiar to most people behind. The mountains with trees on them, that sort of thing. But now, the next point of land after this, we're coming right into Smith Island. There's nothing anywhere in the world like Antarctica. So as soon as we leave here, 7 days out in the ocean again, we'll be pulling into something completely different. We've got to worry about pack ice and icebergs, and we're expecting some pretty major weather out there in the Drake Passage. It's fairly unlikely that we'll get across there without a big blow, and that's going to be kind of uncomfortable.
For Carrie, crossing the Drake Passage means confronting a personal fear. Years ago, she and her crew members were swallowed by the raging sea just 30 miles south of Cape Horn.
I think that probably once we leave land behind and we start heading south into the Drake, I'm gonna probably have some images of it, because it was only 30 miles south of Cape Horn that we capsized almost 9 years ago, and for a lot of years I had nightmares. When we capsized, Katie was steering and all of us were inside, and her comment was, all I saw was a wall of green. And so we got put upside down, and so the boat was slowly filling up with water. Everything on deck broke off. The mast, you could see it floating back and forth in the water. We couldn't go anywhere. We were trapped inside this boat.
They were capsized for 45 minutes. Fortunately, they were tossed right side up by another monster wave. It saved their lives. As they head out to the open sea, They try not to think of all the ships destroyed near Cape Horn.
Hey, Veronica.
Yep.
So where are we?
We're just here. Basically, we're just coming down through this past McKinley at the moment. Hopefully, the wind's going to sort of ease off a little bit, and we'll have a little bit more sort of sea room. Basically, right now, you feel things sort of happening quite dramatically up there. We're sort of just trying to get the mizzen down. A bit of a blow. We're just going to sail along just under the staysail.
How much wind do you think is there?
It's about force 9 out there at the moment, force 8, force 9. It's just, I think it's a bit more, it's blowing a bit harder just because it gets funneled down. I just hope that mizzen doesn't sort of go kapop. If we lose our mizzen now, it's going to be a pretty rough ride across the Drake, that's for sure.
Greg calls a nearby boat for a weather report on Cape Horn.
Okay, Kerry, you can turn onto 69 degrees. You can see how there's a light here and then there's one further up. And you can see over here there's a rock with a... Yeah. Yeah, well basically we want to stay about half a mile off that, so a bit more across this way perhaps even.
Oh my goodness.
Here comes a bit of a blow.
According to the weather forecast that we got then, there was a low down about here. The two most obvious difficulties we're going to face crossing the Drake Passage here are weather conditions and ice conditions. This area of the world is quite well known for frequent and unpredictable, often violent weather conditions. And as soon as we get another couple of 100 miles further south, we're going to be crossing the Antarctic convergence. That's where it gets real cold. It's probably the most serious ocean crossing you can do in a sailboat. Fortunately, it only takes 4 days. At least it won't be a huge drain on the crew, even though it'll be quite intense for that time, the time that we spend getting across there.
The storm surrounding Cape Horn can be terrifying. With swells 50 feet high and winds at 45 miles per hour, fear will kill any seasickness. This day, the notoriously rough seas around Cape Horn lay flat and calm, a stroke of luck for the Northanger crew.
If I'd have thought in Port Williams that I'd be sitting here, sailing past the Horn, eating chocolate cake and drinking cups of tea, I would have been quite happy. Shame about the rain, but sure is a nice day out here.
As seasoned sailors, they knew better than to celebrate, for the Drake Passage still lay ahead.
We've been graphing the barometer pressure. As you can see in here, the barometer is dropping like a stone. It's going down by nearly 4 millibars an hour, which means that in a few hours we might start to get a pretty strong blow. She's blowing about 30 knots out there at the moment. Not too bad yet. But the potential is there for a good storm, so we're just waiting for that to happen at the moment.
As they entered the Drake Passage, the full force of the westerly gales hit them head-on, driving the currents into massive waves. 50-foot waves are not uncommon. Others, reaching 100 feet, are not unknown. As the Northanger rolls and lists on each side, Dan turns the camera on himself. Strapping himself to the stern, he captures the mountainous seas and the fury of whitewater that is crashing into the boat.
Seems a little bit rough up here.
This should be a 4-day crossing, but they're making little headway. Winds are coming at them from the wrong direction.
Sounds like sort of Veronica's down there googling away in a bit of it.
So basically, what's our situation, Greg?
Well, the wind's blowing right out of the east, which it's supposed to never do here, and wind blowing more out to the west, which is what we'd hoped to avoid. But unfortunately, it seems like the wind's come all the way around to the east and picked up pretty strong to about 30 knots, and we're having to plug into it, not making much. Not making a lot of progress at all.
Count the Rogers and see if there's still one up top.
Yeah, let's go and see if Rogers are right up there. But I guess all we can do is hope that it's going to change around to the east, to the west again, and blow us back in over.
They had not yet crossed the line of convergence that marks the cold waters of the Antarctic and the warmer waters of the southern hemisphere. They were getting close to their destination, but it wasn't a comforting thought. The violent swells reminded them of what lay on the other side. As they fought the riotous seas of the Drake Passage, waiting for them in Antarctica were icebergs, numbing temperatures, and a stubborn island with an unspoiled peak. The real hardships of the expedition were just about to begin. In Part 2, the Northanger team successfully crosses the Drake Passage to arrive in the more hostile environment of Antarctica to realize an unfinished sea-to-summit quest. Will they overcome the odds against them and make it to the top of Mount Foster? Antarctica is an ice-covered land of spectacular beauty, towering icebergs, and the most powerful forces of nature. For the Northanger expedition, it's both destination and dream. Traveling over 10,000 miles through the most treacherous seas in the world, they face their biggest challenge yet, the forbidding and yet unclimbed summit of Mount Foster.
Hello everybody, I'm Andy Mill. The Northanger Sea to Summit expedition has overcome incredible obstacles. They have navigated through invincible swells and unrelenting winds of the Drake Passage and have finally reached Antarctica. Dodging drifting icebergs and handling icy sails, the Northanger team is about to confront the ultimate challenge and the reason they have traveled 10,000 miles at sea.
Antarctica is a vast ice sheet that grows and shrinks with the seasons, doubling its size in winter, melting in summer, loosening glaciers which send icebergs crashing into the sea. For the Northanger expedition, this will be home. They have traversed over 10,000 miles from Vancouver, British Columbia to the South Shetland Islands in Antarctica. Their goal is to be the first to summit the formidable peak of Mount Foster on Smith Island. The crew is following in the footsteps of legendary British explorer H.W. Tillman, who was lost at sea on his journey to Smith Island. To get here, the Northanger sailed through some of the most treacherous seas in the world, navigating around the infamous Cape Horn and through the clashing waters of the Drake Passage. Now, they must face the coldest and most challenging part of the expedition. Greg Landreth is the skipper and leader of the Northanger expedition. Carrie Pashik, Greg's wife, and the 3 female crew members will be responsible for the boat once the men leave on their attempt of Mount Foster. Bruce Dowrick and Roger Thompson make up the rest of the expedition team. 500 miles from Cape Horn, the sails unfurl with the grace of a crew who has survived some of the most dangerous ocean crossings to reach Antarctica. The dangers in Antarctica are different, but no less intense. Ice, cold, and unpredictable weather present new and unforeseen hazards. Antarctica is a vast ice sheet over 6,000 feet thick. During winter, the surrounding seas freeze, doubling the size of the continent. But now it is summer, and in these brief 4 to 8 weeks, the Northanger can navigate through the open seas. Greg and Carrie sailed here 10 years ago. It has been their dream to return and climb Mount Foster on Smith Island.
I guess it's the purity of the place that really attracts you. I mean, it seems like there's nothing here except rock and ice, and even really mankind hasn't made much of an inroad into the place at all.
It's such a special place, and everything is just completely awe-inspiring.
The Northanger, I think, is ideally suited for an expedition like this. She was purpose-built for this kind of thing. The lifting keel is an obvious advantage in that you can pull the keel up clear of any pack ice and be able to operate in amongst that without fear of the keel being caught in that ice. And also it allows the boat to operate in very shallow water where icebergs and sort of deep draft pack ice can't get to you. So it allows you a lot more latitude in the places that you can operate in.
There's something mysterious about Antarctica that continues to lure back those who have been here before. Even though the Northanger's keel is designed to handle ice, a constant lookout is necessary to maneuver around the floating ice chunks.
The further south you go here, the more navigation is dominated by the presence of ice. Once you get into the channels down here, the dangers are somewhat different, more subtle, but you still can't let your guard down. Even though Northanger is about as strong as you can make a sailboat hull, it still doesn't mean you can be blasé about it. It's amazing that we can sneak around in here in a boat like Northanger. Everywhere you look around, the marine wildlife is starkly displayed. Crab eater and weddell seals are everywhere, and they're the ones who truly know this place. We come and marvel and do our thing, but we've got to remember that this is their home, not ours. Seeing the seals basking on the ice floes is great. It sort of makes you forget for a while your own tenuous situation. Antarctica seems a much friendlier place with them around for sure. The moving ice here posed a really hazardous situation for Tillman. In his boat, Mischief, which is wooden hull, a large ice floe at high speed could either put a big hole in it or he could pop a plank or something. He had to be a lot more careful than we do. And I'd say that he was pushing it a bit coming down here in Mischief. Ice moves in unpredictable ways, so it takes constant vigilance to keep it out of harm's way. But even for us, being stuck in the ice was always a constant threat.
Yeah.
One morning we wake up and a small berg has moved in on us. What seemed like a snug little cove had become a bit of a trap. If the iceberg is not grounded, you can generally push on it with the boat. Here also you've got to be especially careful of the propeller on the ice chunks. Can't afford to lose that. It takes a while, but you've got to be patient, and they will move eventually if they're not being pushed around by something else. Finally, we were able to free Northanger and continue on our way. I guess this is the essence of adventure. The forces that draw us here are the very forces that can also destroy us. Our art lies in being able to enjoy our own vulnerability.
On the journey south, the Northanger was able to relish the occasional close encounter of the minke whale.
Sighting whales is always a special moment. We can't ever resist the impulse to be near these incredible creatures. One can sense their gentle intelligence.
These miraculous mammals rise to the surface with surprising gentleness. Antarctica is a land of extremes. The severe weather conditions dictate all forms of life and means of survival.
Life here is brutally harsh, and for them, death is only a moment away.
It is not unusual to see life among the dead.
One morning, we woke up to 5 inches of heavy snow on deck. It's a bit miserable and wet, but just sort of typical of the things we encounter. You've just got to take it all in stride as part of the bigger journey here.
The deeper they sailed into Antarctica, the bigger the icebergs became.
It's very tempting to sail right up to these monstrous pieces of ice. It's perhaps an attempt to absorb their power or something, but it's pretty dangerous. In Tillman's day, they had to be a lot more watchful for these large ice floes, and I don't think Mischief could get too close to them without risking damage. Tillman had to have crew on the bow to push these ice floes away from the boat. and we don't really have to worry so much about that.
Tillman and his crew aboard Mischief took turns standing vigil for the jagged, misshapen polar floes that were always on the move.
Very often icebergs or ice floes would move in on us overnight when we're in an anchorage. When that happens, we've really got to move the ice away, and there's only one way to do that, and that's tow them out with the dinghy or push on them with the boat. And this one. Sometimes also they get caught in the shorelines, and we've got to untangle them then as well. Over the top of that small one. Might have to go right around and I'll pull it from the other side.
They must push, pull, or wait for the iceberg to drift away. They decide to use their stern ropes, breast ropes, and springs to release themselves from the confines of the sharp ice.
It'll probably break up at some stage if it's trapped here and it's sort of going up and down.
Yeah, once it gets into the shallows though, and sort of a bit more wave action on them. Pretty amazing how big a piece of ice you can move, really.
Yeah. The sheer enormity of Antarctica is what strikes you when you're sailing around in here. It takes a while to sink in that you're really so far away from civilization here. And it's just you and the elemental aspect of nature. It's hard even to think of doing something like climbing a mountain in amongst this stuff. Sometimes it feels just big enough to be here. And it's easy to lose yourself in amongst the inspiring beauty of just where you are.
The Antarctic Convergence is where the subantarctic water joins the colder water of Antarctica itself, producing an abundance of wildlife.
You have a look, some of the Cape pigeons are actually catching something, they're actually dropping in the water and grabbing something.
There always seem to be these Cape pigeons flying all about us. They're actually the most numerous seabird in the world, I believe. I guess this wouldn't be the first time that climbing expeditions have sort of lost their way amongst the inspiring beauty of where they are.
After 10,000 miles and 6 months at sea, they get their first view of Smith Island. The 7,000-foot peak of Mount Foster is hidden beneath a shroud of mist.
It just doesn't seem real somehow. After all that planning, it's just unbelievable that we're here.
For Carrie, the challenges of Antarctica are the reasons she keeps coming back to this forbidding land.
It's almost unbelievable. It's almost, it's totally unbelievable. I can't believe we're here. It's amazing to dream after all this time here. I can't believe it. Big celebration tonight.
Boy, she's a pretty awesome looking island, that's for sure. Now as we're getting within 10 miles of the island, it's becoming easier to pick out the features and the ridges that come down from Mount Foster. I'd never seen Mount Foster before, actually, but we're starting to pick out the ridge that we might take to the top. Looks like that ridge actually might have a bit of a double cornice on it if this is the ridge side. I'm not quite sure which one is going to go or whether any of them will go. It'll really depend on whether we can even land on the island or close to any of them, I suppose.
They took a reconnaissance around the island from the Northanger, but they knew they needed to take the dinghy in for a closer look. As they get closer to Smith Island, it was apparent that they had a difficult task ahead of them. There were no bays, no inlets or fjords, just sheer ice cliffs, glacier tongues, and boulders that discouraged any landing.
Yeah. I think the thing to watch out for is all that sort of serac fall from the slopes above. As we come right up to the shore of Smith Island here, it's become quite obvious that we're not going to be able to get Northanger in too close. As the shoreline is uncharted, we can't risk the boat. We can see a few rocks with waves starting to break over them. This is pretty dangerous territory, so we're going to have to go in for a closer look at an inflatable.
They were up against two challenges. The first was going to be getting onto the island. The second would be their ultimate goal, summiting Mount Foster. They decided to do a scout of the island in hopes of finding several possible landing sites. Finding a suitable place to get onto Smith Island was going to be harder than they imagined. There were huge swells and towering cliffs. The breakers seemed to extend 1 mile offshore.
Take off it again might be a bit,
Right on that point there with that
just
rock.
by the next to that rock sort of thing where that ledge is.
I mean, the thing would be to get the boat on it and then basically run up the rock as fast as you can.
I mean, just now probably wouldn't be too bad, but like
If you get it wrong and we flip the bloody Polaris, we'll know all about it.
yeah, it looks
That's a fair old swell.
yeah, it looks pretty serious.
The real challenge would be getting themselves and their gear onto the island without capsizing the dinghy, or worse, losing a crucial piece of equipment.
What we decided on was basically that we put all our equipment into dry bags. We all dress in dry suits, which fortunately we had with us, and ferry it in, try and find a spot right on the shore that wasn't too exposed to the swell coming in from the sea. Feeling good there, Bruce? Really, the act was to get everything off of Northanger into the inflatable and onto the shore without losing anything.
Is it worth going through our list one last time before we initiate the entire procedures? Took a roll call.
No, we've got enough stuff here. We can't possibly go wrong.
Okay. We can't have an adventure unless we leave something behind.
That's right. Well, let's leave a couple of these yellow ones behind.
Yeah.
On purpose.
How about the stove? That would be a good one.
Yeah.
And leave the cook set behind.
The act of getting us and all our equipment onto Smith Island and onto our base camp was probably actually the most difficult part of the climb. Looks pretty stable overall. Yeah, it's alright. I also wonder whether the tide's slightly higher. I think probably the thing would be to jump in on that shelf when the water's going in on it and then just get washed up on it. Actually, if you just pull us in, Bruce, I'll drop it in a bit closer.
There's my purple camera gag. Okay, see you later.
Took a good part of the morning and about 6 trips just to ferry all the gear across from Northanger to Smith Island.
Because of the depth of the water and the huge swells, there would be no anchorage at Smith Island. The plan was for Carrie and the female crew members to take the Northanger back to Melchior, where they could count on a safe anchorage. The next big task was to get all the gear up the cliff and establish base camp.
To get up onto the rock ledge so that we could access the glacier, we had to set up a Tyrolean traverse.
Okay, we'll just take him the extra drag off. Take it, we'll take it, you tie it off.
Which means that we had to string a rope from the sea level up to the rock and haul our gear up that.
Everything was moving smoothly until one of the dry bags fell into the water.
It just happened to be the bag with the single sideband radio in it, and that was our main contact with the boat. Now it was gone. I'd kept out the VHF radio, a small handheld, and we tried to contact the boat right away to see if they could come back. They couldn't hear us.
Smith Island, Smith Island, Smith Island. This is Northanger, Northanger. Do you copy? Smith Island, Smith Island, Smith Island. This is Northanger, Northanger. Do you copy? Smith Island, Smith Island, Smith Island. This is Northanger, Northanger. Do you copy? After we dropped those guys off on Smith Island on the 27th, we were supposed to have radio contact, and we didn't hear from them. We left at 12:30 after dropping them off on the rock, and they still hadn't made it up the ice cliff yet. And so the plan was to get back to Melchior with the boat before the weather turned, because it was supposed to turn, and then hopefully hear from those guys on single sideband radio. And we haven't heard from them yet on single sideband.
Seeing the radio float away in the bag like that has been a pretty harsh blow. So we put a lot of faith into being able to communicate with Kerry and with the boat. I guess in a way it sort of set us free. We had nothing else now to worry about except us and the mountain. Our sense of isolation here was now enormous.
At a brief resting stop, they watch a serac send icebergs into the sea.
Yeah, it's probably done its thing now. That's funny, isn't it? Like you watch the crack and you can sort of see it, but it's happening so slowly.
We hoped that once we got higher up on the mountain, we might be able to re-establish radio contact, but it was kind of a slim hope. I knew Kerry would be worried, but I wasn't overly concerned. We'd established a backup plan.
While the men strategized the start of the ascent, the female crew members embark on their own odyssey.
The expectations and the anxiety and everything built up so high for so long, and it was just kind of like this moment of respite, you know, 4 of us alone on the boat now. Those guys were climbing on Smith Island, and finally the quest had begun, sort of.
In Milkir, they can count on a safe anchorage while they await news from the climbers. Today, they would begin their climb. All the months of meticulous planning had led to this one moment.
We'd already decided that our only real chance of summiting was to go extremely light and move fast. On this island, the weather breaks only last for maybe 20 hours, 24 if you're lucky. So the only way to do this kind of climbing is be bold, do as much as you can, and if you don't get to the top before the weather comes in, then you've got to fight your way back down. When we left base camp, it seemed like we were going to get the chance. But a few hours out onto the ridge, the weather really turned.
The reasons for the previously failed attempts on Mount Foster were because of the unpredictable and violent weather in the area. They hoped the weather wouldn't foil their attempt as well. They were prepared for the worst, and the worst was setting in.
It took all of us a long time to get into the rhythm here, just one step after another. Each step you have to make sure is secure. But after a while, when you've done this for a few hours, it just seems to go on and on and on, almost hypnotically. It's easy to get lost in your own thoughts here, just one step after another. But you've also got to remember that you're responsible for your partner. And later on, that's going to become a lot more important.
After several hours of making slow headway and fighting unrelenting winds, they had to make a crucial decision.
We'd been going for about 4 hours and got up to about 1,500 feet just underneath the rock band, and it seemed like the difficult climbing was about to begin. With the weather coming in like this, it just seemed as if it was going to be impossible. Reluctantly, we had to back down the ridge, go back to base camp, and wait for the weather. We were pretty despondent about getting up there and having to come down again. But now we had a bit of the measure of the mountain. We knew what we were in for. and we knew that if we got another weather break, that it was possible that we were going to get to the top. I really wish at this time that I'd been able to contact Kerry to let her know what was going on.
Smith Island, Smith Island, Smith Island. This is Northanger, Northanger. So it's the 29th today, and we dropped them off on the 27th, and we haven't heard from them in 2 days, which really isn't too worrisome if they're going for it on the mountain, but I'm feeling kind of guilty in some aspects that we didn't wait around to hear from them via VHF, just so we could have known something. We've given a 5-day leeway. If we don't hear from them for 5 days, weather dependent, we're going back to the island with the boat.
We dug a snow cave when we first made it to base camp. I think that's a lot more secure than a tent, even though it looks a bit grim.
Big wind cloud things, rather than just that nice sort of cumulus stuff.
It can get a bit cold sometimes, but at least you know you're not going to get blown away.
They had nothing to do but wait out the weather. They had 6 weeks of supplies just in case.
The problem I can see is trying to get everything back in the bushes again.
After a pretty stormy night, we got up to a glorious day. The weather had finally cleared, and we looked up to Mount Foster. If the weather just kept like this for another 24 hours or so, we knew we'd have a chance at the summit.
Dried fruit mix there.
Yeah. Was there any of that fruit mix today?
Yeah.
After our attempt the previous day when we got stormed off, we got a fairly good feeling of the kind of conditions we'd see up here. But of course the conditions had changed somewhat. The snow was a lot deeper. And by the time we got to a high point of the previous day, we were tired again. Still the hard part of the ridge stretched on in front of us. When we'd looked up from the bottom, it seemed as if it was going to be just a straight ridge climb. The actual conditions we encountered was a mixed bag of all sorts, really. There was ridge climbing, there was hard ice face climbing, there was little rock bands all over it. In fact, anywhere else it would have been great fun. We had just enough gear that we brought with us to do what we needed to do. Not too much and not too little.
Something standing on here. Yeah, you mean about hard ice?
Yeah. It's a bit of a layer of goo on top of it, and then there's this blue ice underneath.
Well, as I say, good thing it's not 6,900 feet of this stuff.
If we brought too much, it would have slowed us down too much. And too little, we wouldn't have been able to climb at all. Tillman's philosophy was somewhat like this. Go out with what you think you might need, and if it's not enough, then you won't get there.
Mount Foster was holding up to its image. It kept presenting them with interesting and varied climbing problems. It was more difficult than they had imagined. It proved to be quite a challenge.
Oh God, this is just fantastic. It's absolutely fantastic. And only another 3,500 to go. After we came out of the top of the ice face, we started on the ridge proper. We've been climbing for about 15 hours now. We've probably done about 2,000 feet. We weren't quite sure where the ridge was going to take us, but the weather was holding, and we just had to keep on going.
Well, except for the exposure, it's not too bad, eh?
Ridges like this from the bottom look kind of easy, but once you get onto them, it's a different story altogether. I've always found climbing on them to be a very delicate affair, like walking on a tightrope that you can't quite see. Beneath the loose snow, the footing is invisible, and you never quite know if the cornice is stable or not. Protection is always lousy, and to move fast enough, we need to move together quite often. That means that if your partner slips, you have to leap off the other side to save him, and that involves a lot of trust. Every step is terra incognita in every sense of the word. Well, a little bit more excitement. Hope it backs off soon though, jeez. Still got to come down this. Up here, you know that every step that you take along this ridge, you've got to come back down it again. And that's the hard part. Yeah. Bit more than we sort of bargained for, really, wasn't it? The climbing so far had turned out to be an awful lot more difficult than we'd imagined, and certainly a lot longer. We're now at the top of the ridge, and what seems like the worst part of the climbing is over. After that 10 pitches of walking the tightrope, we finally come out onto a broad snowfield. We've still got 3,500 feet to go, but as long as we can keep plodding along, we know we'll get to the top.
After 18 hours, they got past the ridge and up onto a glacier that seemed to lead to the summit. They had been climbing without a break the entire time.
Now we could see the light at the end of the tunnel. We knew that the summit was ours.
Yeah.
After one last rest stop, we made our final push to the summit of Mount Foster. And we were absolutely exhausted, but ecstatic.
Moments away from the top, they all decided to summit together. Dan, the cameraman, joins them as they climb the last short stretch to the summit of Mount Foster. To stand where no man has stood before was like stepping onto the moon.
No, it's great to be up here. I can't believe it. Congratulations, Greg.
Tillman's dream has now been realized. The Northanger team had achieved the Sea to Summit expedition that lost Tillman at sea.
I'm satisfied that Tillman would have liked the style of this expedition. True, we've got a lot available to us, like lightweight modern equipment. But on a trip like this, no amount of that stuff will dictate success or failure. The most lightweight tools are inspiration, tenacity, and a sense of humour.
When they were high up on the mountain, the climbers finally made brief contact with the Northanger. They were able to tell them when they would be back at the base camp.
All right, well, good one on you, mates. Good one on you, mates. Good job. Glad you got it done and over with safely. Over.
Yeah, I'll tell you what, we're all happy campers up here. We're sitting in the sun, getting our dose of lethal dose of UV. Over.
Well, I'm glad that's as lethal as it all got.
Well, it was quite a bit more difficult than what we sort of figured from looking at it at the bottom. There was about, let's see, 9 pitches, I think, of sort of fairly steep ridge. Quite.
God, what a fantastic summit, though. It was, like, you know, it wasn't too easy and not too hard, so it was just perfect. Over.
What time did you reach the top, Greg? What time did you reach the top? Over.
Yeah, we got back to camp about 3 or 4 o'clock on the 31st afternoon, so the whole thing took about 27 hours from camp back to camp again.
Well, that's absolutely wonderful, Greg. That's absolutely wonderful. Stand by.
I don't think there's any more Smith Islands to climb. There's lots of other climbing objectives, but none of them really have the allure or the magic or the mystery or the history of Smith Island. And boy, I tell you what, it feels really, really good that we were able to do it first. I mean, I can't really say how good that feels, but it does.
The Northanger expedition had set out to conquer the unknown. Relying on their wits and fueled by an insatiable desire for exploration, this team was able to brave the harsh seas and vicious winds to arrive in one of the most remote places on Earth. Having never lost sight of their goal, they rose to the formidable challenge of Mount Foster. It was a fight they would never forget. Antarctica was a land they would admire forever.
I feel at home here. There's just something about this place. It's the extremes, I think. It's like almost being somewhere else other than on planet Earth in a way. And the feeling of being at home here it's like I've been here forever kind of thing.
Once Antarctica is sort of gotten into you, once you've been there, it won't let go. I mean, whether you never come back here again or whether you come back every year for the rest of your life, you will still remember that time, I think, that you were there.